And I think we're recording. Okay, so I'm going to minimize this little thing right here. I'm going to maximize, whoopsies. How do I maximize this? And I'm going to see, okay, how do I, let's see if the chat can get going. All right, so the chat is, I'm going to try to put the chat down here, but I don't know if that's going to continue working. Okay, cool. Alrighty, everybody. So welcome to Summer of Shipping. There's a lot of new people on the call. And so this is your introduction to Summer of Shipping. There's also going to be a lot of people for this is not new. And so welcome. This is week 2, day 14. So last week, we talked a little bit about projects and things that can kill projects. We talked about what I call the dual objectives of a project and how essentially you can be very, very mission oriented and try to ship a really good product, or you can be really learning oriented and try to learn a lot, but you really need to strike a balance between these two objectives. There's a lot of stuff in there, kind of theoretical, but something to keep track of while you are building the summer. We also talked about some collaboration models, kind of focused a little bit more on open source models, but different ways that people can work together. And so that was last week. We did some demos. I had our first demo, so that was really exciting. And finally ended up with breakout sessions. This week, we are going to do some housekeeping, just because there's been a good amount of growth in terms of the number of people on the mailing list and a lot of people who might be participating remotely. And so that's going to be one thing we need to think about. And then also want to start thinking about hackathons and events and more ways to get us together, which would be really exciting. Then I'm going to talk about Git. This is one thing that a lot of people get on the job is some training with Git. And so we're going to talk about that. Finally, there's another idea I had was to form study groups. One of the objectives of the summer is also to gain skills, and having a way to learn together I think could be a lot of fun. So I have some suggestions about that. Finally, we'll do our demos and our breakout sessions. So that's what we've got going on today. As a refresher, what are our objectives for Summer of Shipping? They're pretty straightforward. There's 2. The first one is to improve your resume. 1, improve your traditional resume. That's going to be, where'd you go to school? What kind of projects do you have? What kind of job experience do you have? In our case, we're going to try to amp up the number of projects and the quality of projects that you have. The other thing is to improve your public resume. We've talked about this in the past, and so I'm not going to go too much into detail today, but it's something that I'll be harping on again and again and again, which is to build and to learn in public. And so the reason for that is if you have a good public resume, when somebody stumbles upon your website or something along those lines, they're going to be like, who is this person? This person is somebody who's interesting and potentially could be a good candidate for the junior role that I'm looking to hire. So that's why the public resume is really important. But there's actually more reasons. We'll talk about those over the summer. I'll keep on harping on that, but that's the other thing that we're trying to improve resume-wise. Finally, we want to improve the skills that you'll need on the job. Code quality is big. That's something that I really care about. Communication is big. That's something that we're going to try to focus on. And there's a long tail of other topics that we will focus on. Today, we're going to talk about one of those, which is Git. And it's something that a lot of interns and junior engineers, they struggle with. And a lot of people actually just, they tap out at a certain level of Git. And once they get into trouble, they're just like, no, like, let me go turn to somebody or something. But Git is something that is really, 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 really helpful. And when you're getting started, you can feel like an imposter because you don't even know how to do basic workflow management because you don't know Git. And so what we're going to try to do is there's only so much I can do in a presentation, but we'll try to touch upon some of the topics on Git that come up in production. The soft objective, I didn't put it in this slide, but the soft objective for the summer is to be able for all of you to tell a really great story about what you did this summer. And if you had a canceled internship or you didn't get an internship, just to say, hey, regardless, I still did something great with my time. And that's a huge soft objective. And to be able to talk about, hey, this is what I did. Maybe you do a write-up, maybe you do a YouTube video. That would be like really cool. So we're going to do some housekeeping today. Again, we've been growing. So we're going to talk about these 2 things, growth, and then the next thing are the events that I want to potentially throw and some ideas that we've had. So growth for this program is really good. It's good because The bigger we get, the more collaborators there will be, the more mentors there'll be available, and the more people will see your work. The last point is really important because the more people who see your work, the better feedback you'll get, the better ideas that you'll have, and the easier it will be to learn in public. Especially if you have a group of people who are very supportive, behind your back, that makes it a whole lot easier. And it will improve your public resume, which is one of our goals for the summer. So where we are right now, we're currently at 240 signups and about 30 available mentors who have showed some level of interest. And so I don't think everybody who signed up is going to be here. In fact, I think it's going to be a lot less than that. The available mentors wise, like maybe 30 of them said they wanted to mentor, but maybe only 20 of them actually are going to be able to commit the time. So where are we? That's where we are right now. I think a really good target for us is to get to about 500 active participants and to have about 50 to 100 available mentors. So in terms of where we are in terms of that, we're about a quarter there, which is pretty good. And so if we want to continue growing, growth is good for this program, then I'm going to need some help. And if you're interested in helping this project grow, there's going to be a survey out tonight that I sent to everybody. Please fill that in. And so the reason for this is my focus. I really want to focus my time on high quality mentorship that can scale. And if I'm spending my time on growth, then I can't spend as much time on the mentorship. And that's not where I want to be spending my time. So essentially that's what that is. Now there's some challenges with growth. When we've grown, we've also realized that we've now spanned multiple time zones. And so there's a lot of people in Africa and the EU who are, I don't know if they're all dialing in, but they might be watching the YouTube videos. They're still a part of the program. And so like finding a way to support all of our friends on the other side of the world, as well as in Asia. I don't know if anybody's dialing in from India right now, but I know we have participants from India. And so being able to support multiple time zones, it would be a big plus. If you're interested in leading a regional meeting similar to this, look to the survey. Right now, it's a half-baked idea, but there's going to be a lot of thinking and just initiatives regarding making this a more global footprint. So the other thing with Zoom is we're getting close. Well, I don't know how many participants we have at the moment. Can't tell, but whoops. Okay, we're at 50 participants right now. So we're not actually at risk of hitting the 100% limit, but we're halfway there, and maybe a little bit more than halfway. And so this is something to think about. Once we get closer to that limit, we're going to have to, I'm going to have to upgrade the Zoom to a more expensive tier. And so the question here is, could we get any sponsorship help? And that's something that I would love to think about as well. But so as we grow, these are going to be our challenges. And for all of these, if you want to participate and help me out, then there's going to be some stuff in the survey. Would appreciate that very much. Okay, so next slide. Next slide. All right, cool. So today's topic is Git. And we are just going to do some pretty high level stuff, but also at the very end, touch upon some stuff that are helpful in the weeds. And we're going to go to a website that I think is really, really useful for people who get into difficult situations, even though I may not 100% agree with the recommendations, but it's still a pretty good website. All right, so in school, what do you do with Git? You literally probably type in 6 or 7 commands, and I'm showing the top 3 used ones. So at school, you're probably like, all right, this is what I do. I know Git. I'm just going to add all my files, always, all of them, all the time. Git add dash capital A. Then I'm going to commit. I'm going to give a random commit message. ASDF is a pretty good one. And then I'm going to push this to master. And maybe I'll force push just because. And so this is what people oftentimes do before they use Git in industry. They just kind of think it's like this. On the job, it's different because you're actually oftentimes working with, a handful of other people, at least 2, 3, oftentimes dozens at large organizations that have mono repos, thousands maybe. And so it can get really messy. So it's, I made this point that interns get themselves into hilariously complicated and hard to predict issues. I forgot to add the word issues, but it's just common. And so that's one of the things that we're going to talk about. So we're going to replicate the intern Git mistakes through this presentation a little bit. So before we do that, one thing I want to talk about is the mental model of Git. And this is my mental model. And maybe it's not great, but I'm just going to share it. So I really like to think of Git as a journal. So if you have a journal or something that you write every day, you essentially say like, hey, this is what I did, blah, 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 blah. And you just kind of like are annotating your life, right? So in Git, how would we do that? We would perhaps work on a file called nothing.txt. And then once we are ready to say like, hey, I want to commit this, I want to write about this, then you would add that file and then you commit and you give it a little message. That's what the -m flag says. Dear Git, today I did nothing. So that's essentially what Git does, right? Oh yeah, and if you want to see all your general entries, that's your log. So if you do git log, you can see all the entries. But Git isn't just any journal. It's a journal that allows you to time travel, which is really crazy. Imagine if you were to write everything in your journal every day, and you could go back in time to any of your entries. Well, suddenly that's a very interesting tool. It's no longer just a journaling tool, it's a time travel tool. And really that's what Git can do. So imagine that we had a branch called yesterday. We can just check out that branch and time travel to yesterday. That's pretty cool. And not only is it cool, we can start making alternate timelines based off of our time travel. And that's essentially what this branching business is all about, is you've got this journal that's keeping track of everything that's going on. You can time travel, and then you can pivot from basically an old point in time. That's pretty insane. The other thing about Git is multiplayer. So many people can share the same journal. Everybody who's working on the same project, they all share this one log. And we can all time travel together, which is absolutely insane. There's a few questions that might arise when you're like, okay, well, I've now got this super powerful time travel code journal. What happens, and other people are also using it. So that's great and all, but what happens when I've made a change? How do other people know about it? Also, how do I know when other people have made a change? And what if we are changing the same exact thing? So the way that Git solves this problem, well, not solves this problem, but one way that Git solves this problem is basically remote servers. And oftentimes when you are setting up a GitHub repo, one of the things that they'll tell you to do is this command, git remote add origin, https github.com, whatever, blah, 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 blah. That's just telling your local computer that, hey, there's a remote server, and that's just going to hold all of our game state. Essentially, the remote server is the canonical truth of what is going on. And the term origin here isn't special. It's just a naming convention. You could name origin like, happy feet or something. And you could that could be the name of your remote server. And you could have more than one. Some classic ones that people use, GitHub. One funny thing is I think a lot of people think GitHub invented Git. That's not true. Their branding is just that on point. They then Bitbucket is also a big one. GitLab, AWS Code Commit. I think GitOlite is an open source project. I'm not entirely sure if it's open source, but it's also a popular repository server. And so in order to interact with the server, people will push to the server, and then they'll fetch and pull from the server. So that's how we coordinate the game state. So let's go back to this. How do other people know I've made a change? Well, you push your changes to the remote. How do I know when other people make changes? Well, I fetch to see the changes. I run a status check to see what's different, and I can pull changes if everything's clean. And then finally, what happens when people change the same thing? Well, there's a merge conflict, and Git gives you the ability to resolve this merge conflict successfully, or if you are trying to do it and you mess up, you can always abort. So it gives you the option to eject. So let's talk a little bit about commits. So commits we talked about like making journal entries, and those are essentially, commits are journal entries. Commits are kind of like points in time. They're snapshots of the world. Like I said, they're also a journal entry. They can have metadata, so that's your message, the author, the time, what happened, all that good stuff. And commits can have at least one parent. They can actually have more than one parent if you do what's known as an octopus merge. I have a huge aversion to merging multiple branches in at the same time. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, just ignore me. But for those of you who have tried merging multiple branches at the same time, you can get away with it, and that can be fine. But and if you're handling the merge, you might have to do all of this work. But I really am not. It's not my favorite thing to do. In practice, where possible, a linear history is the best. So that's going to be one commit, one parent. It's a simple linked list. So commit histories, just compare. So on the left, we've got like one crazy sprawly like commit history. It almost looks like a transit map. That's how complicated it is. And on the other side, it's a linear Git history. I just took this from a project that Nick and I are working on. And you can see it's a line. There's no branch, there's no crazy divergence whatsoever. And if you ever want to see essentially the Git log, where you and basically the tree of what's going on, do git log -- graph, and that will show you what I'm saying over here. So oh, I got a question. So basically, I need to get what's on the server before I push my changes. Yes, you should definitely do that. We'll answer some of those questions later, but I think there's a little conversation that's happening in the chat, and I'll let that happen. And I'm not going to address that at the moment. So I'll let that conversation continue. Okay. So how do you get a linear Git log? One of the concepts that you might see when you're trying to do a Git merge is this concept of -- f. And you're like, what is ff? Well, ff means like fast forward. And fast forward only is, okay, merge this like branch in only if it looks like it's a strict fast forward, if it's going to give me a strict linear history. And sometimes you need a rebase first. And rebase is a concept that it's a really, really important concept. I don't think I made a slide for that, but I'll talk about that in a little bit later. So the command git checkout is actually a lot more powerful than you might think. So in the past, I talked about, hey, we can check out and go back in time. And that's because we had a branch that just happened to be called yesterday. So we could check out to that branch. But it's more powerful than you think. It's not just checking out branches. You can actually check out an arbitrary commit hash. So if you open up the Git log and you find any of the Git messages, commit messages, you can actually check out a commit hash and go to that point in time. Git will tell you, it's like, hey, you're now in a detached state or whatever, but it's essentially it's how you time travel. Then the next thing that you can also do is you can check out like tags. Tags are essentially just like you tag a certain point in time and you can jump to it. So a lot of times people use tags for versioning. One thing that I want to talk about is the difference between branches, tags, and commit hashes. And this is something that I think a lot of people get tripped up because they think branches are special. They're not. So one of the things to think about, if commits are like snapshots, then commit hashes are their names. And so it's the hash is it's not just its name, but its identity. And branches and tags are like aliases to commit hashes. They're not that special. And so anytime that you can use a commit hash, there's a good chance you can use a branch. There's a good chance you can use a tag. In fact, the term master is not even that special. It's just really just a naming convention. You don't really have to use master. You can your production environment can be called like Bob's Burgers, and I mean that would be a horrible name, but you could do that. And there's nothing special about the word master. It's just a name for a commit hash, really. There's also a special alias called head. So if I'm on master and I basically type git show head, that's the same thing as if I typed in git show master. And so head is just whatever this current branch is pointing to, the head pointer. And so that's essentially what you'll see. You'll oftentimes see people type in head tilde 6. What does that mean? That means like, okay, take the current head pointer and then advance it backwards in time 6 steps. And you can also do the same thing by adding a lot of those carets. And so each caret means go back in time 1, go back in time 1, go back in time 1. So that's essentially what that is. So essentially that's that. Some concepts that people get into are rebasing versus merging. There are different ways to get up to speed. So essentially rebasing and merging are 2 different concepts that can essentially like it just get you to get up to speed with your entire team. said what rebasing is really important. A lot of people, when they come onto the job, they don't understand rebasing. And rebasing is something that essentially what you do is you can, if you are behind what's on master and you want to get up to speed, you can rebase and bring your changes up to master, even if you've made changes from there. That's kind of a tricky way of describing that, but it's a very useful concept. I'll show you one case when you really need it. One thing that people oftentimes forget is a git ignore file. This is how you ignore the node modules and secrets and so on. Another useful concept is a ref log. It's kind of a history of where you've been. Sometimes if you really get stuck, a ref log can feel like, oh wow, I'm resurrected from the dead. So that's that. The last thing here that I want to give you guys a reference to is this website. Ran out of time to get you out of some of these difficult situations, but there is this website, Oh Shit Git, that has some pretty good ways and tips to get out of bad situations. If you kind of take some of the principles that we talked to and start saying, oh, okay, I can see what's going on there, you can actually get out of a lot of really, really, really bad situations. And so putting all these pieces together, you're now going to have a mental model for how to essentially use this tool very effectively. One thing that the reason why I was talking about rebase is this situation happens a lot. So you just fetch the remote state, and now you are looking at Git status, and it tells you this message. It says that your branch and master have diverged, and sometimes it might be like, okay, you have 5 different commits, and they have 10 different commits. And if you essentially want to do this, bring yourself up to speed, this can actually cause a lot of problems. One thing to get out of that is to do a command git rebase origin master. And so that will put your changes on top of the origin master. And so that command right there can save you a lot of hassle. There's a bunch of commands that I'm not going to go into in too much detail right now, but they're useful to know. If you know all of these commands, you're going to be able to get out of a lot of really difficult situations. And so we will, we can dive into those at another time, maybe in one-on-one if you get stuck on a really bad branch. All right. So some things about interns in Git. Interns get themselves into Git help. It's like almost a 99% certainty that an intern one day will be like, hey, yo, can you help? And then it's like, yo, okay, so what's going on? Like, I'm trying to land this code, and I just it's beyond repair. And so oftentimes fixing a really bad Git situation is something that's almost a rite of passage. Hopefully, if you take the time to study the things that I've been talking about, you won't be in those situations, but it's still possible. Another thing that interns love to do is they love to make really, really large Git commits. And so if you get, if I see a change that says 197 files changed, 4,128 insertions, that's just going to be too much to review at once. And so what we're going to try to do is break them up into much, much smaller changes. So if A is a really bad example, B is a much better example. That's much more manageable change. And a lot of things that interns don't do is they don't introduce aliases into their workflow. And so they'll always type out git checkout. And so one of the best things to do is to alias that. There's I think in Z Shell, they have a bunch of aliases already for you, which is what I use. And I just type in GCO, and that's my alias for git checkout. So it saves a bunch of time. Very, very useful. All right, so that's kind of Git. These essentially, I'm hoping that you don't get into a whole lot of Git hell, or if you do, now you have a few more tools in your toolbox to kind of deal with that, kind of seeing some of add the mental model with some of the commands. It'll get you out of difficult situations. Make smaller changes. That's a practice that is really important. At a lot of organizations, they try to make sure that you only do small changes. And then use aliases, they will save you time. Alrighty, so study groups. Alrighty, study groups are just a concept that I want to bring up because it's one of those things where people will, they talk about like, hey, I want to learn this, or I want to do this. And I think one of the best ways to do that is in a group. And so I have a couple of ideas on how to do that. So one thing that was brought up just in office hours was the book Designing Data Intensive Applications. This book is really good, and it will give you a sense for how to design large scale applications. They talks about all sorts of data intensive pieces of infrastructure. It covers caches, queues, databases, all sorts of things. It's really, really, really good book. And it's just something that is an excellent resource. And so that's one thing that, I think would be really good for people to dive into. Another thing that's also excellent is this. It's a series of design patterns put together by Azure. They're just called cloud design patterns. And again, it's extremely, extremely excellent. So the idea here is to form study groups so that people can learn together and present on a Thursday. And so again, these materials are really good and you'll learn a ton. So if you teach something to others, you'll learn even better. If you're interested in forming a study group to do like a book report or a study thing, then it's also going to be on tonight's survey. Another thing that people really have expressed interest in doing is tackling or getting into an open source project. They're oftentimes it's hard to grok an open source code base, but you oftentimes also need a maintainer's help to do that. But it's apparently a very good experience, so I'm told. The solution that I'm trying to put together is to form study groups to try to break, just if there's a ton of people who want to, perhaps, let's see how does the Ghost project work, then we can form a study group to understand that. So the goal is to grok a code base, maybe submit documentation to improve, and then at the very end, just to learn. So the last thing here is the goal is not to land code. So that's essentially what this thing is. And again, if you're interested in this topic, then go to tonight's survey. All right, and finally, this is going to be a recap from last time for people who were here last time. This is going to be just a reminder. All righty, so we have action items. So these were set to be due next week, and so essentially just to get started on your projects. The first thing is just email me a list of your ranked projects, the ones that you're thinking of executing for this summer, as well as a list of things that you want to learn. And so once you have that, just email that to me, and then start working on getting to the Hello World version of that project. We want to be ready to demo sometime next week. If you've already started on a project, try to figure out what's the minimum demoable product. And so once we get there, we can essentially demo. So email me a description of what you think it'll take you to get to that demoable thing. And then finally, so everyone, let's get on Discord. We'll send an email with a link to the Discord later today. Also get on Twitter. That's one of the things that we have to talk about building in public, learning in public. And then send me the email from the left and book office hours once you have time. So that's essentially where we are headed. All righty. So let's see I think that's it for the slides that I prepared. And now we will hop into demos. Alrighty, so I haven't checked the conversation, but I think there's a lot of stuff. I just know at the very beginning, I think Ferrin had something to demo, and oh wow, there's a lot of stuff going on. Oh, okay. This chat's been going off. Okay, so we've got Ferrin with something to demo. After this, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, so I'm going to do that now. And I am going to turn it over to Ferrin. So whenever you're ready, Ferrin.
Okay, so let me get everything running real quick. So the crux of my demo today is just actually, let me turn on my camera. Start. Is it gonna do it? Sorry, one sec.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I think we can see you now, and you should be able to share your screen whenever.
Okay. Yeah. I just need to make sure it's running before I. Sorry. Give me one sec. Actually, you know what? Let me share my screen, and that way I can just show what I'm doing. Share screen. Share. Okay, so here is a run that didn't work. Give me 1 second. Oh, wait, no. CD. Okay, so my project is called Tattooder. The idea is it's like Tinder for tattoos. There's a little more detail there, and I haven't exactly worked out how it's going to be. So my minimum demoable product was just a server that starts, just a web server that starts. So let me. I need to. So the backend is going to be stored in MongoDB. So I need to have MongoDB running for it not to crash when I start. DC up. Is Docker not? Sorry. So I guess Docker's not started. Right now I'm running Mongo in a Docker container because it is the easiest way to go. So I don't actually have to install anything or configure it. It just mostly works when it. I need later. Damn it, Docker, would you please not? Okay, so what I have to do is I have to start it with Docker Compose. So this might take a second because I've never actually run it on this computer, but
No
so.
worries. Hey, Ferrin,
Yeah,
do you want to explain what Docker Compose is so that people can follow along what you're doing right now?
yeah. So actually, I should explain Docker. So Docker is basically a way to create containers. They're little OSs that are running isolated from each other. So you can set up an environment in this container and just run it. There's no installing, there's no whatever. You create an environment and it has everything you need to run your code in. Docker Compose is a way to just create a bunch of them at once to talk to each other.
Yeah, and one of the things that Docker Compose is really great for is actually replicating like a production environment on your local machine. So that's a very good use case of Docker Compose and something that I love using it for that. And so Ferrin using it locally here is a really great demo of that technology.
Yeah. So, and what it means I can do is just run the command DC up and it creates everything. And if I did the Docker Compose correctly, it should be set up exactly the way I need it. So give me 1 second. Okay, so that's Mongo running. So we're gonna start this. So the big fancy thing here is that I have a login page that works. So let's do that. So let me bring a browser window open over here. So if I go, it sends me to a login page that does something. So right now there's only one login with a default password, and it gives a 404 error because it doesn't have any idea what to do, but it's something running.
Hey, it's running.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's pretty exciting. So can you talk about all the pieces of infrastructure that are being hit as part of this error?
So the first thing that's being hit is a web server.
Yep.
The web server says you're not logged in. I'm redirecting you to the login page, which is here.
Okay.
Then the login page. So right now it's set up so that the login page, I'm cheating a little bit. So I'm using a library called Spring for Java. So it's cheating right now. The default configuration for Spring is an in-memory database. So there's a little database running in the Java code that's storing all of the login information. So it's hitting that to get the credentials. Then it logs me in because I put in the right credentials. And then it's like, oh, wait, there's nothing for me to actually display here. So I'm just going to go to 404.
Nice. Gotcha. Awesome.
Yeah, so
and on application start, do you ping your Mongo instance at all?
Yeah, so it pings the Mongo instance on start to check
Nice.
that it's up. That's why the first time I ran it, I was getting that a bunch of exceptions. So
Nice.
the other thing that's set up here, because Spring is really nice, is if I go to localhost 8080 actuator health, it will say everything's up.
Hey, okay, okay.
Yeah, it says everything's up, and then I can go actuator info, and it will give whatever info I gave about the project. Right now it's nothing, but it's returning some data. So
Awesome.
yeah,
Very
so
cool.
this returns empty JSON, and the other one, so when it goes to up, it will actually query Mongo. It will run a health check to Mongo to say, are you running right now?
That's awesome. Awesome.
Mhm.
Cool. Any other challenges or things that you ran into while building this? Anything that you want to talk about?
So in terms of challenges, not really. Spring is pretty good at giving you something that just works. Um, from there, they have like a tool to build the starting server. So something that just runs tends to be pretty good, pretty easy. The big one was getting Docker Compose set up correctly for MongoDB.
Nice, nice.
Because Mongo, I've never used Mongo before,
Mm.
so it's figuring out Mongo's weird things.
Nice. Yeah, so that's this is a great example of just I think I talked about tracer bullets and just getting something, the architecture or up into end. One of my friends, he says he used to work at Accenture, and he used to say like they would do a lot of what was called proof of architecture. So they basically just spin up the infra and be like, okay, we can get data flowing from here to here. That means if we can do that, we can build pretty much 90% of what we want, and it's not going to be an order of magnitude harder. And so I think that's a really great demonstration.
Yeah, so I'm getting a bunch of questions. So not the first time anyone's ever combined Spring and Mongo. That's a built-in feature of Spring, which is really great. So the actuator health and actuator info are built-in of one of Spring's sub-projects, Spring Boot Starter Actuator, right? Why can't I? Oh, because this is IntelliJ, not one sec. Settings. Let me make my font bigger so I can show this. Editor font. Let's go 20. So that is this dependency right here, Spring Boot Starter Actuator, includes that health and info by default. And so it knows, Spring is really clever, so it knows what other things you've included, so it knows how to check those other things as well.
Nice.
And then there was one other one. So somebody said the Mongo instance inside the Docker container, right? So yes, Mongo's running inside the Docker container. So what happens is, and so the other question was, is localhost for my machine or localhost of my Docker container? The answer is both. When Docker is, let me go to my Docker Compose. In this Docker Compose file, you see how I'm exposing this port. So what that says is give this port on the localhost on this port on the machine to localhost on this port on my machine. So it's saying localhost in the container at this port goes to localhost in my machine at this port. So they can be isolated or not isolated depending on how I set it up. If anybody needs help with Spring, I can help. Oh no, so 27017 is just the default port for Mongo.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
And anyone's got any questions or things that they want to ask Ferrin, or
Yes.
actually,
Yeah, so I can actually show kind of my first step. So I'm on a branch here. So the kind of first step, I actually stashed it all so that I could show you this is where is, oh, here, git unstash changes. So what we're going to do is so one of the things I've been adding is switch. So that's using Spring's default login. So the main thing I've been working on is saving all that login information in Mongo instead of in the in-memory H2 database, because when I move to like a proper thing, I don't want each instance to have an in-memory database storing everything. So the first step here is where
Hey,
is
Ferrin,
it?
when you got this file open, we've got a question, and someone's asking, why do you have to map port 27017 to the same port? Essentially, the person is asking, what does that mean?
Okay, so the reason you have to do that is because the idea of Docker containers normally is that they're walled off from the outside OS.
Mm-hmm.
They can so in this Docker compose file, these two can talk to each other, no problem. But neither of them can talk to the outside world. So what we're saying here is expose port 27017 to the outside world.
Right, and so essentially, I think what that does is also now on your local machine. It looks like if you go to localhost 27017, just in your browser, you'll actually ping this Docker container.
Yep. So if I did
and
this, I could do.
Is everyone familiar with what Docker does? Like a very high level?
Yes. Whoever wrote that comment, this exposes the containers 27017 as 27017. Yes, that's correct. Exactly.
Yeah,
so Ferrin just demonstrated that. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, Nick was asking if everyone is familiar with Docker as well. And that's something that we might, need to address.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got some people who are just hearing about Docker. It's kind of a, I guess we can talk about that another time. But maybe because that's a pretty deep topic. But essentially, Docker, it almost is like a way to run. It's like almost like a lightweight virtual machine. Is perhaps a pretty lightweight way of thinking about it. And a lot of people Dockerize things. It makes operations a lot easier just to share, because you don't want to download a bunch of dependencies. The Docker container, the Docker image might have everything in there already. And so it's a very useful technology.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Sweet. Alrighty. If I'm just gonna, while we've got Ferrin on the line, I'm gonna ask if anybody else has a demo. I think we had Joshua who said he might want to demo. But just want to make sure that I've got a mental list of who's going next. And while we're doing that, we can maybe ask Ferrin.
Stop sharing.
Yeah. Cool.
So Andrew, not exactly. You can, but it's not necessarily the right way to do it. It depends exactly how you're deploying things. The question you asked specifically is actually a ridiculously deep subject.
Yeah, there's essentially, if you want to distribute a Docker container, you oftentimes will distribute an image, and so you want to share images, and you can. There's a place called Docker Hub where people can go. Yeah, exactly. They're hosted somewhere. Yeah, Docker Hub just hosts all the images, and some of them have, for example, Elasticsearch already spun up in them. Some of them have Mongo, and that's where Docker Compose is pulling from.
Yeah. So what I could eventually do is put this in one of those Docker containers and run the Docker container somewhere, but I would still have separate Mongo container and a Mongo Express container and all that other stuff. And I could do it in one Compose file, but Docker Compose has some limitations in terms of where you run and how many you run and things like that. If I were to actually run this in Docker containers, I'd probably run it on something like Kubernetes. That's too much for here, but it's probably the right way to actually run it.
Alrighty. Hey, is Joshua still on the line? If Josh, if you are available, then we can turn the floor to you to do a quick little demo.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, cool. All right. So I think Ferrin has stopped sharing, and so you can now start sharing your screen, and we can start the demo from there.
All right, so this is my progress on my personal website for portfolio and stuff so far. I clearly have a content issue as there's nothing on the main page.
Okay.
But if we go to the projects, I've got this auto-populating with Flask and Jinja. So it loads the GitHub links, the replit. If there's not a source aside from like a repo, it just loads the GitHub larger. I do also have these set up so that when I get the individual project page set up, I can click it and it'll link it to there. Resume downloads my resume, and then these all link to my various social media.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, awesome. And can you talk about how the how you're serving up this page right now? It seems like it's on local, but
Yeah, I haven't loaded it yet, obviously, since I don't have the content, but it's just Flask, simple Flask app. I've got the roots aren't doing much except for the projects one, which pulls from my projects list Python file, because I don't want to hook it up to a database because not really the point for something this small. And this just quickly populates a list of the various projects and their statistics.
Very cool. And are you using a front-end framework on the?
Yeah, Bootstrap.
Content? Okay, so Bootstrap for CSS. Any like React or Angular or one of those things, or is it vanilla JavaScript on the JavaScript?
It's Jinja, but there's not really any JavaScript on it other than the vanilla JavaScript for the links on the tables.
Cool. Awesome. And when did you start this project?
I only had some time to work on it like Friday and Saturday last week. But I stole a lot of code from my database project from my database class.
Hey, okay. That's one of the things I was reading this week was just on the origins of both Linux and fetchmail. That's essentially, I think last week I talked about the cathedral and the bazaar, and this week I decided to actually go read it. And one of the things that he talks about is how for these projects, it's actually best to start with existing code. And so if you can get an existing code sample and just go off of that, that's a lot easier. I think Linux started with, I think, Minix or something. And the guy who he created a thing called fetchmail. It was another open source project that he took over. And so essentially you're just taking one of your old projects and repurposing it for this one. And I think that's like, it's a fun way to get started because then you're not starting from absolute zero. So.
Yeah, it was real quick. Like I said, I only had maybe a day to work on it.
Yeah. It's awesome. Sweet. Okay, let's see if I've got anybody else who wants to demo. Let's see. We've got, okay, Van, if you want to demo, that's all good. So if you want to take over.
Hey, y'all.
Yeah, you want to take over the screen share.
Yeah, sure. Just a little bit of a jank setup because I don't have a mic hooked up to my computer. I have to talk through my phone, but I can screen share through my computer, so just bear with me on that.
Gotcha.
Screen. There we go. Screen share. Hey, all right. So this is my website. It's pretty much just made off of JS script, Sass, and CSS. Oh, hold on. Let me just hide that. Okay, so when you first load up the website, you get to the home page, and then you get just the context of the website, navigation, and then a short introductory brief summary of each page. Here we have the home page, which is this page, the projects page, which is obviously self-explanatory. It's where all the projects are found. Resume, which is more information on my resume, and then the blog, where I just kind of put like updates about how I'm developing things and stuff like that. Cool. And at the bottom here, you have, I couldn't find I could just not get the logo for LinkedIn to work over here. So I just have a link, literally. So this would be LinkedIn and this is GitHub. So here on the projects page, I have tiles. Now, see, when you scroll over these tiles, it takes the color off, and then you also get a brief definition of what the project actually is. Nice. So here you have 4 projects I have planned out for the summer because I unfortunately don't have the last month to actually do things. Got classes, but whatever, just deal with it. So got 4 projects: Recognizer, which is real-time facial detection web page; Visual Sort, which is visual sorting algorithms; UPlan, which is a daily planner for college students; and then Fair, which is a diet tracker and optimizer. So typically when you would click on these pages, it would go to another page, and usually would have this if I don't really have anything planned at all. However, let me go back to projects. Because I have Project Recognizer plan, I can go into that, and I have actually a Google slide embedded here.
Okay. Okay.
Just quick thing. Does anybody actually want to hear about this? I can just put this off for later on. I can show it for the rest
Let's
of the
do that
website.
another time. Yeah. Yeah.
Sweet. All right. So then the blog page is just, again, it's just pretty much a copy of what I have on the project page. Here I have a tile function, and then I have another page which kind of goes into my blog. And then for resume, it's just a bunch of tables and just styling from the CSS. And this is pretty much it. Really, just reusing the same pages over and over again. Thank you very much.
Hey, great. That's a great start. It also seems pretty professional, and yeah, it looks like you're pretty much there for a lot of the styling and stuff.
Yeah. Well, actually, just real quick, here's a really good website if you can't really decide on colors. So there's a website I use called Coolers Co. I actually used to not really design images. I used to just make stuff that looked pretty. And then you can actually either just generate things right here. So if you want to go into the Discord, I'll just put this in there.
Great.
Then you just hit space. It'll just put in different colors, but they'll always be most likely to look good together. So you could just keep hitting space and lock certain colors in until you like them. Or you can just hit exploring trending palettes, which I did. Forgot to save which palette I used, but hopefully it's still here somewhere. I don't know, probably not. And it just gives you the most trending palettes on the website. So if you're ever having any trouble picking that, you also have where I got my images, unsplash.com. Here it's free high resolution photos for reuse, non-commercial or commercial, it doesn't matter. And you literally just search up whatever you want. So let's say laptop. There we go. And I just slapped all that content onto here, and that's how I got the color. That's how I got the photos and everything so on.
Great. Awesome. Those are some really useful tips. Yeah, if you can drop those in the Discord so we have a reference to them, that'd be great.
Absolutely. All right. Stop sharing now. If anyone else wants to present, it's up to you.
Cool. Thanks, Van.
No problem.
Alrighty. Yeah. Do we have anyone else who wants to demo today? I don't think I saw any. I wasn't really paying attention to the chat just now, but I don't think I see anything. Ferrin says he can show his personal site. Ferrin, let's save that for another time, just because we had a chance to see the current tattoo progress, and so we can check that out maybe next week. Let's see if we've got anybody else. That was Van. I think that's everybody. All right, awesome, cool. So I think that wraps up our demos, and with that, we're going to move into the breakout sessions. At this point, I'm going to stop the recording, and so that will